he's the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history at this point. But I will say that there are people, I know people go down, rabbit holes on Twitter and stuff like that. And I do think Jeffrey Sachs I think he was being somewhat tongue in cheek when he said it, but I do think he's overstating his hand. It's not that Israel runs America. If Netanyahu ran America, I can promise you we would have had a regime change war in Iran. We would not have stopped where Donald Trump stopped if Netanyahu was actually in control of the U.S. military instead of just having significant influence over it. So I do think I've just read enough about Netanyahu, the Likudniks, the neocons. This is the regime change war that they've wanted. This is their 7th. This is 7 out of 7 to get Iran. So this is what they want. Right. And if you actually even look at the war itself, it was when Trump, it was before and after Trump dropped the bunker busters on their nuclear sites, Israel just started bombing regime targets. They weren't just bombing their nuclear sites. They were trying to overthrow the regime. And in fact, they made calls to these Iranian generals and threatened their families and basically said, we're going to kill your families unless you guys flee right now. It just didn't work. They weren't going to do that. And then once that didn't work, they were kind of and then Iran gave Trump an out. They responded with this nonsense, the same thing they did after Trump killed Soleimani, where they fire these rockets, they give us advance warning, They make sure we move everyone out of the way, because they know they don't want to kill an American there because then it's full-scale war. But, if they hadn't, it's so funny because we put all of this in the mullah's hands. And if they had just decided, which every military analyst concludes, they can touch Americans in the region, they didn't. Had they, this would have been and I think that was the goal. I think that was Netanyahu's goal of it, was to provoke that response that would have led to a regime change war. And it didn't work. And Trump, to his credit, his instinct is to de-escalate these things when he can, but also to Trump's fault, never should have gotten in the thing to begin with. It was the whole Iranian nuclear threat is as much bullshit as the Iraqi nuclear threat. I mean, yeah, it is true that they have a civilian nuclear program that Iraq didn't have. And it is, I saw when Mike Baker was on, who I love Mike Baker, but I think he's wrong about all this stuff. But when you had said to him at one point where you were like, yeah, but the counter argument to that is that this is like a latent nuclear deterrent. Is the idea, not that they're developing a nuclear weapon. And Mike was basically like, yeah, but they're up to 60%, and that's on its way to 90%. But the thing is, why weren't they at 90%? They didn't have to stop at 60%. They mastered the fuel cycle and they figured out all this technology a long time ago. They could have enriched up to weapons grade. Why did they stop at 60%? And why did they then enter negotiations with the United States of America about the level to which they were enriching uranium? Because it's a latent nuclear deterrent. It's a bargaining chip. They were down at 3 to 5% or something under the JCPOA until Trump tore it up, until Trump backed out of it. And then under the rules of the JCPOA, because they're still in it with Europe, and we'll see where that goes now, but they were allowed to up the enrichment once America pulled out. And so they exercised that option in the agreement. And the idea that they were there was the annual threat assessment had come out just a few months before the war, and Tulsi Gabbard signed her name at the bottom of it and then testified before Congress, and it's clear as day. She turned around and acted like people were misrepresenting it, but they weren't. It was clear as day. Anyone can read it for themselves. She said Iran has not made the political decision to pursue a nuclear weapon yet, let alone have achieved it or gotten one. And when Donald Trump was asked about that, remember they said, your own director of national intelligence says that they're not developing a weapon. And he goes, well, I disagree.
Have you ever seen I'm sure you have, the compilation of Netanyahu over the years saying how close Iran is to getting a nuclear weapon?
Yeah, it's great. Have you seen, there's other compilations of him too, where he's just guaranteeing, all his guarantees. There's one of him in I think it's the year before I was born, if I'm right. It's 1982. And he didn't go by Benjamin Netanyahu back then. He went by whatever his more, European sounded name was.
Why did he change names?
Well, because they all
when?
80s, I would guess. It's got to be in the 80s. He was Netanyahu by the 90s. But in the 80s, they were still calling him whatever. I can't remember his previous name.
Why did he change his name?
Well, they all kind of, because the whole thing, Joe, is that they're all, Israel was a European, construct. They were made by a bunch of Europeans who came over and created Israel. But then they have to claim that they're the true Semitic people.
Is it true that genetic testing is outlawed there?
I believe that is true. I believe that's true. I double check me on that, but I believe it's true.